Okay, so now finally the alias VPC. So within the region, you're able to create VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. And when you first created your account, there was a default VPC. Now each VPC contains subnets, and subnets are just networks. And each subnet must be mapped to an AZ. So basically, if we take a look at this VPC, we have two subnets in AP Southeast 2A. We have a public subnet and a private subnet. So it's very common to have a public subnet in your AZ, and it's very common to have a private subnet in your AZ. Basically, the difference is that the public subnet is accessible from the World Wide Web, whereas the private subnet isn't. It's also common to have as many subnets per AZ, and overall, many subnets overall in your VPC. So this is a typical architecture you get for VPC. So in this case, we have a VPC. It has 6 subnets, 3 public ones, 3 private ones, and each of them are in AZ. AP Southeast 2A, 2B, and 2C each have 2 subnets. Fairly simple, just remember about it. So remember in our course, basically everything came with default VPC, and there was 3 default subnets available for us. Now the public subnets, what do you put there usually? You put there your load balancers, your static websites, your files, your authentication layers, and the private subnets, usually they will contain the web application servers, your databases, and so on. So basically you ask yourself the question, what do I need to reach from my browser over the public internet versus what do I need to reach from my private network, or what does I need to be reached from the web actually? And so for example, our web application servers, as we've seen from our course, they are behind the load balancer. So they don't need to be in the public subnet, they can be in the private subnet and talk directly to the load balancer only. So basically the idea is that, as I said, the public and the private subnets, they're able to talk together and they're in the same VPC, and this is how you could just separate your concerns. So just a quick brain dump on the VPC. Overall, I would say they're not as much at the developer associate exam, okay? But still, my conscience needs to be clear, and I need to teach you about it a little bit just so you're aware of what they are at a high level. All new accounts come with the default VPC, and it's possible to use a VPN connection to connect to your VPC, and basically that gives you access to all the private IPs straight from your laptop. There's something called VPC flow logs, which allow you to monitor the traffic within, in and out of your VPC, which can be quite useful for security, performance, and audit. And the VPC are going to be at the level of the account per region. So if you have 5 regions, you need to have 5 different VPC. And if you have 5 accounts, again, all the VPCs are going to be different. The subnets are only within the VPC, and the subnets are attached to one AZ only. Some AWS resources are able to be deployed in VPC, while others cannot be deployed in VPC, and that's just how AWS works. And overall, a very good feature to know is that you can peer VPC, so within your own account or across accounts, to make it look like they're part of the same network, and that's quite a common pattern. Basically, when you start to have a large organization and many different accounts, but you want to make sure all the VPCs seems like they're part of the same network, you would go ahead and peer VPCs. So the only reason I'm telling you about VPC is so that we can look at the typical architecture of a web app, which is called the 3-tier architecture. And this is, to me, this is the achievement of this whole first 2 sections on the fundamentals of AWS, is that with all the building blocks we have, we're actually able to create something quite complicated, but quite secure at the same time that makes sense. And this is all that we've learned into one slide. So if you understand this slide, to me, you have understood everything I've told you about. So we have the user on the left-hand side, and it will query Route 53 for an alias record. And using that alias record, it will go straight to our Elastic Load Balancer, okay? And that Elastic Load Balancing is in the public subnet because it has to be accessible from my machines, for example, or from the World Wide Web, right? Behind the ELB, we have an auto-scaling group. And the auto-scaling group, because we need it to be highly available, is going to be split between, for example, 2 AZ, AZ-A and AZ-B. And the auto-scaling groups basically spins up EC2 instances. In our case, these are M3 instances in EC2, and we have 4 of them, 2 in each AZ. And the Elastic Load Balancer basically spreads out the load onto each of them. But these instances obviously can be added as scale out or removed as scale in, and that really allows our ASG to be responding to high traffic or low traffic. Now, our instances, they usually talk directly to our RDS database to do some operations. And so we have RDS master right here. And because we want to be super resilient to failures, we also set up cross AZ replication to have a standby replica, RDS slave, basically a standby. And basically if the first RDS database fails, our application automatically fell over to RDS. But because we're very conscious about reads and writes and user sessions, etc., we also wanted to set up an elastic cache cluster, so it could be Redis in this case, and this will basically allow us to read stuff off the cache and cache data, for example, user sessions or data straight from RDS. And so that's the typical architecture. As we can see, finally, the autoscaling group is in the private subnet because it only talks to the ELB, and then our Elasticache and RDS, they're in the data/private subnet. So you can create another subnet here called the data subnet, or you can just reuse the private subnet. But basically, all these things right here are not directly accessed by me. As an end user, I only access my Elastic Load Balancer. So to me, again, if you understand what I'm saying here, and if this makes a lot of sense to you, then you've understood the fundamentals of AWS, and I want to congratulate you for it. And thankfully, we're here. So in the next lectures, in the next sections, we'll go a deeper dive and we'll start exploring serverless concepts and CI/CD and more developer workflows. But when you start with AWS, you need to be able to look at this diagram and say, yep, that makes a lot of sense before we go into the more advanced concepts. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope you understood everything so far, and I will see you in the next lecture.